Hello. I was nodding to our tech director who was like, I'm bringing you on now. And here I am, live on your screen with my face. I'm Bri Castellini. For those of you who don't know, I am Seed&Spark's film community manager, and welcome to another Lunch and Learn session, our weekly Wednesday learn and food for some people session where we talk about all manner of things. So first, we'd like to acknowledge that the land that we are all on, that I'm teaching on, that you're viewing from, is occupied territory. Please check the YouTube live comments feed for a link to a First Nations COVID relief fund and an amazing app that will tell you exactly whose land you are currently watching this from. They will also be in the video descriptions if you're watching this video on demand. So thank you so much for coming. And if you're not familiar with Seed&Spark, the company that's very graciously doing this thing for all of us right now. We are a platform built to support creators by providing tools wherever you are in your journey, from crowdfunding to education to creative distribution approaches. So now you've seen far too much of me already, so I'm going to bring on our two awesome guests and composers, AK and Taylor. So I will be joined immediately by AK and Taylor. Hello, hello. Do you guys mind introducing yourselves, what you do, and also if you could share a misconception that non-musicians have about musicians? That would be, I think, a fun way to start off our conversation.
Well, my name is Taylor. Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Okay, cool. My name's Taylor Blake. I'm a saxophone player. I'm primarily a jazz musician, improviser, but I'm also a composer. I write more contemporary music, like less influenced by Western classical music. I'm really into indie rock and pop and jazz-influenced musics. Your question was a misconception that people have about musicians.
Mm-hmm. Music, musicians, however you want to interpret it.
I've actually been thinking about this a lot lately, and it is that people who are non-musicians kind of look at musicians like they have superpowers and that they have this crazy, like almost like otherworldly talent, that it's like they're one of those people. And I feel like, you know, if you love something, that's just love, you know, that's just because you really love that thing, and that is the only really special thing about musicians, is we just really love music. And yeah.
All right. AK, how about you?
Hey, sorry, Taylor, I think that's a really great answer to that question, and I agree with that a lot. Yeah, I'm a composer. I'm based in Santa Monica, California, and I'm from here, but I lived in New York for a long time. I have my career started more as a vocalist, and I did come a little bit more from the classical world, but then I also spent a lot of time in bands. So I have a lot of influences, and I'm interested in a lot of different sounds. And I just recently finished a master's degree in film scoring at USC, which was really cool, and it was really exciting. It was something I felt like I really benefited from. Yeah, and a common misconception. So I was interested to hear I asked my grad school cohort some questions about what they thought about that. And everyone has some really specific answers. But I think I would say, from filmmakers' perspective, just like to build on what Taylor said, like I think that many people feel as though they kind of need to know what it is they want from a score, or exactly how they want that score to sound. And I think there's this idea that, like, if you don't tell us what to do, we won't be able to contribute to your film. Sometimes there's a little bit of that, and I think there's a good relationship you can build where, you know, you tell us what you want in terms of drama and like how can we support your story, and then the next step is kind of like letting us translate that into music, you know, and kind of like trusting us to be the translators, as opposed to telling us you want certain things, you know, because you might not know, you might think you want something and it'll sound really different than what you might be imagining. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's great, and I feel very subtweeted right now, but rightly so, because I am a filmmaker with a crippling anxiety over my own lack of vocabulary. So let's unpack this together, everyone. And also everyone in the chat, please feel free to be asking questions of your own. This is meant to be a conversation with composers. And just because I'm the one that gets to talk the most doesn't mean that I'm the only one that gets to ask questions. So please, if you have questions, throw them in YouTube chat. Thank you, lower slide, and we would love to hear from you. So my first question is, when you're starting out, when somebody is coming to you with their project that needs scoring, what information do you need at the very beginning in order to even start having the conversation about scoring the scene or the film as a whole? What's the first thing you need to know, basically?
Okay, you want to take it first?
Sure. I think like just from a total organizational standpoint, like what's your deadline is really important, because before we have any conversations about what you want from the music, we have to know what we're working with. If you're trying to make a festival deadline in 2 weeks, you're probably not going to have live players unless it's like Taylor or me and people we know who we can call in kind of an emergency, like we need you to record from home tomorrow, you know? So timeline is really important. If you've got a big project and you want big music, there is more time involved in that. And I think that is I understand it's like a very practical answer to your question.
No, I think people don't think about that.
Yeah, I think it really, the time that we have really impacts what we can deliver to you. You know, the more time you give us, the more artistic it can be, the more recording we can do, the more revisions we can do, the more we can tailor it to be exactly what you want. And the less time you give us, the faster we're just kind of throwing stuff together on our own end, you know?
Definitely.
Taylor?
Yeah, having due dates and deadlines is definitely helpful to have that hard date, because you can make anything that I could do this tonight, or I need 2 months to do this, for sure. From a more creative standpoint of answering this question, I always talk about the motivation of the characters and of the scene at length with the director, and really just kind of get that vibe and that feeling in my body of, okay, this is the intention of what is going on right now, and I need to, be that translator, and this is the mood that I need to convey for what the director wants.
So is that a conversation you can have even before you see a cut of the film? Like, are these conversations that you would ideally be having even before, maybe not before it was shot, but before like an edited piece of the scene is sent to you guys?
I would say so, yeah, just to get your head in that space. And then, definitely once you see the rough cut of the scene or the film, you're going to have a much clearer picture and an understanding of what you're going to need to do for it.
I think that's useful too, because like when you talk to someone about their project before you see it, like what lens they're viewing their own work through. So like sometimes there's a disconnect. You get something that's supposed to be funny but isn't funny, a drama but isn't that dramatic, or there's like a lot of synergy. Someone tells you like, I want this story is drama, but it's not enough. Like what I'm looking for from you is to enhance the drama. So then that's how you're watching what's been sent to you, right? Through that lens of like, my job's going to be to do X with this. Like I'm already starting to look for moments that I can like build those things up,
Like you have a preconception.
Yeah, that's cool. So what happens when the filmmaker isn't really sure what they want the music to do, but they have watched their rough cut, or they're going into their rough cut thinking, probably I need music, but I don't know where? Because I will say for me, like one of the things when I'm watching movies is I don't really notice the score. And like in some cases that's by design, it's meant to enhance emotions that you're visually seeing, because auditorily people don't always process things consciously. It's very unconscious of an experience. And that's certainly been mine. And I have trouble sometimes articulating, like, I think there needs to be music here and I don't know why. So what would you say to me if I came to you like that? What questions would you ask me to kind of get at like something that I probably know and just don't know how to articulate?
Well, I think that you can look at this in terms of the arc of energy from the beginning to the end of the film, you know, rather than from a scene by scene basis, you can kind of gauge like, okay, so, you know, how do I want to grow and build the energy throughout this piece? And how can I do that in places that might seem, you know, like the music is kind of just there, but it adds that little touch of push for energy in certain directions.
Yeah. And I think part of why you bring on someone like us is to help make those things happen, right? Like, you know, there are filmmakers who want to spot a movie with me or want to hand me their temp and be like, this is where the music goes. And then there are people who feel exactly the opposite. They're like, I don't know. And I think that's, it's very scary to put your trust in someone else, right? You might have worked on this project for a decade and mortgaged your house to pay for this movie. And now you're handing it off to someone and crossing your fingers. And that's really scary. But also, you know, you're trusting that once we have these conversations about, like you were saying, emotional arc and drama, then we go home and think about how does that translate into music? And there are people for whom, I think something that I learned in grad school that was really interesting was I started to realize that for many, many people can't imagine music, right? Which was yeah, and that's pretty normal. And I read, you know, musicophilia, but I kind of didn't get it until I started working a little bit more. So I think sometimes like our job is to provide you with a bunch of stuff, and there's going to be this awkward period where you're like, I don't like this, I don't like that. Oh, I like this. Out of the 8 cues you sent me, I like this one. Okay, like that gives us a direction, and that's okay. That's sometimes like a really normal part of the process, you know?
So from a craft perspective, I'm curious, like, are there keywords that people will say to you that make you immediately go like, oh, okay, I think I should go with a particular instrument or like vibe of music? Like if you're talking to somebody about the arc or the energy or the character motivations, like, are there things that like are automatic associations in your head? Like, oh, romantic comedy, acoustic guitar or something like that?
Well,
yeah, I think. Oh, go ahead, Taylor. Go ahead.
I think it definitely just depends on what the film is about. Like, sorry, that's a very vague thing to say, but I mean, you think of classic Hollywood scores and, you know, people like John Williams who use these, you know, huge string sections and they orchestrate their music for, you know, an orchestra or, you know, it's, I mean, I think that strings have a place in everyone's heart when it comes to music for picture. I mean, I know that for sure. That's definitely not my arena, but I mean, I think that, you know, a good string section really can be effective to anyone when it comes to if you really want a touching scene or something that is supposed to, you know, strike a nerve for people when they're watching.
Yeah, I think also like when I agree with that for sure. And I think too, like when I'm having discussions with directors, I am listening for keywords like tension, which to me means, okay, something that is not moving, that's very rhythmic, that like holds a sustain, that sustains your interest, that sustains the energy up high, right? So I'm listening for like dramatic keywords like that I kind of already can think about how I can translate that into music. So I'm listening for tension, humor, drama, intensity, you know, things that I can immediately sort of latch on to that help me kind of ground myself in the story. So a lot of times when I'm talking to directors, especially people who haven't been through a scoring process before, I say like, I think it's really great that we talk about drama and like, that's your arena. That's what you really know. You've spent all this time on this project. Like, I know that you can tell me where the drama is and what these important moments are. And that gives me so much good information to turn into musical moments, you know?
It's really interesting. So when you actually settle down to start scoring a scene, what do you need in order to start doing that? Like, does it need to be a final cut? Are you, have you ever done a thing where you compose something and they cut to your composition? Like, what does that technical process look like?
I've never done a project where they cut the the picture to my score. I've always had the final cut or something close to the final cut where I create each cue very precisely, aligning with the time code that comes with the picture and just like boom, boom, boom. But that would be really cool to do something like that. I feel like that would open up your freedom a lot.
Yeah, definitely.
Interesting. So that's not common then especially for, I'm thinking of like maybe like a montage scene, for instance, one where there isn't really an inherent pacing to the shots. They could be shorter or longer. Like, have you ever experienced that and been able to have a little bit more freedom in like the arc of the song?
Yeah, I mean, I think that something I do a lot is I will take themes and depending on, how short or long these cues are, I will just find more fun ways to elongate them, and kind of make it more fun or more interesting, but also keep the continuity of the theme,
That's cool.
Very interesting. So we've got actually a question from Geneva who asks, can you talk about the process of creating original music for a film and then actually scoring? So as two separate concepts.
It's a little, I think in my experience, it's definitely different from project to project because those processes are so dependent upon what that person's looking for, what their budget is. I think listening to Taylor's music, like both of us definitely have like a thing we do. And sometimes someone's coming to you for that thing, but also sometimes someone's not, if like expressly not coming to you for that thing, like they're coming to you for score and they don't want like I do a lot of stuff with my voice because I feel like that's my instrument that no one else has. But people are sometimes coming to me and they do not want any voice on their score. So it just depends. But I've never worked to a locked cut. Maybe Christina Raya, who works with you at Seed&Spark, she gives me a locked cut like somewhere earlier in the process than like almost anywhere of anybody else. But like generally I'm almost never working to a locked cut, which is fine. We're really used to that, I think. And we go through a revisions process for sure. I kind of feel like if you're doing like 10 on my part, everybody is different. I feel like if I'm doing 10 revisions of a cue, I'd probably need to write something new. Revisions as to like just conforming it to a new cut. But so like, I deliver cues attached to picture. Usually we talk about them, or sometimes we talk about them. Sometimes people just write me an email. And we kind of go back and forth until we have all the cues locked. And if you're actually going through the scoring process, then the next step often, it depends if you're doing remote or in person, the next step would be to maybe have a recording session. Or if you're doing it remote, you might be sending things out as they are locked, or you might be sending groups of cues out to different musicians. They record at home, send it back to you. If you've got a big enough budget for a mixer, that's an exciting thing because music actually really starts to pop and sound really great. And then, as you work up to a much bigger project, you would end up actually with a dub mix, which is someone who sits down and has all the music, all the dialogue, all the sound effects on a big stage that mimics a movie theater and actually like mixes everything together in the way that you're really going to hear it in surround sound. So this process just like really changes depending on budget and size of the production. Sometimes it's all of us at home in our studios and it just goes up and up and up from there. The bigger your budget, the more people you have kind of like finessing at each part of the process, making it a little bit better, tweaking it. But it's not to say you can't have a great score for $1,000 or $100. There's so many different ways to do this job.
Definitely. Yeah. Everyone has different techniques and things that they're comfortable with. Me personally, when I read this question, creating original music and then actually scoring, I think of those things all as just the same thing because my process really is performing directly on top of the picture. And then from there, building it up, adding more instruments, And then if I need to, sending it out to other players with music and getting them to record the spot. But yeah, I think of these two things as one pretty much.
Can I
Interesting.
ask? Oh,
no,
sorry.
please.
I was
No,
gonna
no, no,
ask
no.
Taylor a question. So when you're dealing with so much live audio, how do you deal with revisions? Do you have a method for dealing with revisions?
Yeah, if they don't like it, I delete it and I start over. Yeah, I select all and I press delete. And yeah, it's a pretty polarizing and upsetting way to work sometimes, but I think that it kind of injects a freshness into what I do every time. And it, I have to take maybe a day off and then look at it through fresh or listen through fresh ears, next time. But yeah, I pretty much just give it my first take, and then I send it to them, the cues, and they'll give me notes. And I mean, most of the time I'll just totally redo it. Sometimes they'll like certain elements of what I'm doing, and I'll just need to change the instrumentation, just to kind of adjust to the vibe of what they want. But yeah, I mostly delete things.
Wow.
AK, it's so funny you asked that question because that was the exact wavelength that I am also on, because I wanted to open this question up to revisions. So in like writing, like word writing, not songwriting, there are kind of conventions of what is useful critique, like saying, I didn't like this character is not useful because maybe the character wasn't meant to be liked. So in that context, what is feedback that's actually useful once you submit like a first or second pass at the music? What are you actually looking for from that feedback beyond I like it or don't like it? Because there's not a lot to do with that information.
I have so many feelings about this.
Thought you guys might.
Go for it.
I think that unless you really know what you are hearing, it's way more useful to stay, again, talking about drama, and then also saying like, there's a high sound that I find annoying or that's bothering me, or there's a low sound that's kind of weird that I don't like. That's great. I know that sounds vague, but like, I think that's great feedback. I can go and comb through my session and be like, it's this xylophone. She hates it. Great. I'll take it out. So the reason I say that is because we joke all the time, like especially my cohort class and I, like we joke all the time that you get notes like, I hate the guitar. And you go back and you look at your session and you're like, okay, so there's no guitar. So what is it that's now I have to do the detective work of like, what is it that is bothering this person that they think is a guitar?
Right.
And it's this
it's like detective work.
Yeah, and it's very tricky, and I think like it also opens you up to miscommunications where you send the track back and they're like, why does this sound so
still
different?
There.
This isn't. Yeah, exactly. So I think that unless you're like, I know for certain that's a guitar or that's a clarinet or whatever, just kind of telling us like, what is the feeling it's giving you? Oh, it's not quite right. Like, I like the beginning, but once it gets here, it feels like it dies. Things like that are so helpful to us because, again, then you let us kind of step in and use our expertise to solve the problem. And it might feel really helpful and really cool to be like, I hate those eighth notes, but that doesn't help us all that much. It's a very tricky problem for us to solve.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know, Taylor, how you feel about that.
No, I just think that everything you said was spot on, and just speaking in terms that anyone can understand, that that just because we are the composers doesn't mean that you have to speak to us using music language.
Totally.
I think it's definitely most helpful if you use words that have to do with emotion, texture, just things that are more universally understood. Definitely.
I feel like sorry.
No. I was going to ask a follow-up, but I think you might be about to cover it.
Well, I was just going to say, I don't know, Taylor, if you've had this experience too, but I feel like often in my conversations, particularly with like young filmmakers or people kind of just doing this process for like the first time, they'll often say to me, oh, I'm not a musician. And
every time. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's cool. That's why I'm here. You know, like you don't have to be a musician. No one's asking you to create music or think, as you said, like using language that anybody can understand is so helpful to us. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that this is a myth that needs to be debunked, and that will really help the anxiety of the greater filmmaking community if they know you don't have to be a musician to, speak to a composer about what you want,
Absolutely.
Yeah, so remind yourself that the divide is not filmmaker versus musician. It's person telling a story to person telling a story. And if you can find a common language there, it might help. There was a question from Seed&Spark that asked, is there some sort of scoring for dummies resource that filmmakers could use to learn the language to communicate better? And I think that the answer is use your normal words and maybe don't get in your head about it. That sounds at least like what I'm translating from what you guys have just said.
There's also a couple books though. Fred Karlin with a K. I don't love them. They're quite sexist. One is from like 1994 and has never been updated. So there's literally one female composer in the whole book.
Of course.
But you know, a contemporary book's not going to have a whole lot more women either, which is a huge problem. I think women accounted for 6% of all films scored in the last like decade that had major releases. So that finding an inclusive and diverse roster of like the greats is a bit of a challenge, unfortunately, but there are a bunch of film scoring books I would recommend. Like you could just buy On the Track, or there's a Richard Bellis book that might work also, but I would say a Fred Karlin book just to get your feet wet about like, what is the process? What is the scoring stage? Why do we need time code? You know, like getting deliveries from filmmakers of materials is quite complicated. People often deliver stuff to me 2 or 3 times the first time because it takes a while for them to kind of understand what it is I need to be able to help you. But yeah, I would say start with like one of Fred Karlin's books just to get like the absolute basics down of like, what does this entail? Who are the people in, you know, the greater history of all of this? It's a good place to start.
Great. There was actually a book. So thanks, Seed&Spark, for asking this question. So I have one more question that's kind of just higher level about like differences of composers. And then it looks like we've got actually a lot of aspiring composers in the chat who are curious about various things. But first, I wanted to ask the question from Tiffany, who asks, is sound design the same as composer in terms of the language of film scoring? Are you guys familiar with the work of sound designers separately from musicians? Is the language divide similar?
I think in terms of, intention of what we're trying to bring to the movie or to the scene, that, there's a lot of similarities, but my understanding is, sound designers provide background noise, street noise, and sound effects and things like that, which definitely, I wouldn't say that's in our jurisdiction all the time, unless it's a part of a piece of music that is happening during that moment. But
I agree. And I think there are individual projects or teams where sound designers and composers work together. Often those are really separate processes, which is unfortunate because like I think that what we do has a lot of overlap on like the technical side, and then also just like in what you're seeing in the film. Technical side meaning for like composers who are listening, that there's frequency overlap sometimes. They put in a sound effect that covers up your music, or vice versa. You know, both happen. So if you're like ever in communication with that person, that's a great thing because you can work around each other to like enhance the score as opposed to like fighting against each other. But that's not always an opportunity. But like for like movie heads, you know, the people who do all the Coen brothers movies are a sound team, Skip Livesey and Carter Burwell, and their music editor, Martin or Marvin somebody. So the three of them have done every single Coen brothers movie together. So like that's an unusual situation where the sound design and the music are actually like kind of being created at the same time, and they're always in communication with each other. And those create some like really unusual, interesting soundscapes. But that's a more unusual way of working. And I think because that team started as an indie team and then was able to like maintain their relationship and their closeness, their whole big team, right? They all stayed together as they ascended into pretty big budget movies. So that's a little more unusual.
Cool. Well, kind of with that, starting in indie and moving up, Esther asks, what advice would you give to composers first breaking into film scoring and connecting with filmmakers? What are some first steps in putting together a reel or portfolio?
AK, you want to take that one?
Sure. So I think connecting, all my advice I'm going to give you now is pre-COVID advice about connecting with filmmakers, because at this current moment, I think the internet is extremely powerful, and all the Facebook groups you can join them, but that's also hard. It's kind of exhausting. I went to a lot of networking events whenever I was able to go to a festival that something I worked on was in. I went, and that sounds like very hoity-toity. If it was like a tiny little local festival, I tried to go. I got to work on a doc that went to Big Sky Film Festival, so I like spent my own money to go to Montana for that. I would say probably something you could learn from Seed&Spark is like the smaller festivals, you tend to meet people. Bigger festivals, it's pretty hard to like actually meet people and like make a connection. I found like Tribeca to be very difficult. Whereas like Big Sky's really small. There's nothing else going on in town. That's pretty much it. Everyone's super nice. So, and then in putting a reel together, this is something I've struggled with too. Like I'd be curious, Taylor, to know what your answer is. I've seen reels that are one long track over cuts of different movies you've worked on. I've seen reels that are like shorter pieces of music, 3 minutes, 1 minute, 3 pieces of music, 10 pieces of music. I think that in reality, you probably need to cut together a different reel for each thing you're trying to apply for, or each person you're trying to speak to, which is I know that kind of is a shitty answer. It's a lot of work, but I think that in reality, it's like a resume, and you wouldn't send the exact same resume to 10 different jobs that all have kind of 10 different job descriptions, right? So your reel should probably, maybe you have like a general video reel or a SoundCloud playlist that you keep on your website. But if someone's looking for music examples, I would send them what fits with what they're looking for rather than dump everything you've done on them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense, especially if you think about like acting reels. Nobody just has an acting reel. Usually people have a comedic acting reel, a dramatic acting reel. Sometimes they go between series reels and feature reels, side character reels, main character reels, like whatever variety that you have, you can get really granular with. Make those ahead of time and keep those templates live, and make sure that if somebody else is editing it for you, you're in constant contact with them so that you can get a little tweak. But the more templates you give yourself, the more malleable you'll be in applying, which I think makes sense.
Right. Yeah. Something I've seen people have on their website that I think is really cool is they'll have just little clips of, it might be public domain footage or, footage from a project that they previously worked on with, just as an example of their music on top of that moving picture. And I think that's great because then the director or whoever's looking to use you can visualize your product on top of, theirs. And
actually,
that's really smart.
When I was applying to USC, the head of that program said to me, we'd rather see you rescore an existing movie or existing footage than have be distracted by, your friend's movie they made in their backyard that isn't very good. So if you think you've got a really good clip from something great you've worked on, that's awesome. But if you don't, I think rescoring is great because, like you said, it focuses everything in on your music. It's great. It looks good already. It's fine that it exists. And it's also such a good way to practice.
Yeah, that's really smart. Yeah, you don't need to have had past work to be able to prove that you can work in the future. And
Absolutely.
that's true for artists of all kinds. You know, it's the reason that TV writers write spec scripts. You don't have to first write your own pilot if you can prove that you can be on a writing staff of someone else. So great question. Thank you. Mr. 5x5 says, I've often put together playlists while writing projects. Are these useful or overbearing to a composer writing an original score? So it sounds like this person is like a screenwriter.
I think that playlists and examples are super useful. A lot of the time, if they haven't already made a playlist to give me an idea, I'll ask them to do that. You know, just to kind of get an even more in-depth look of like where their mind is at, and kind of what styles or genres that I'm going to try to be, you know, replicating or drawing inspiration from. Totally.
I also love to, I agree completely. And I also like to ask, like, what does someone like about some of those tracks too, especially like if there's something that, right? Because sometimes there's like a thing that they like that is not what I thought. It's like, oh, I hear that this is fast paced, cool, like it's got like a groove. And they're like, oh, I just like the sax. I'm like, oh, okay, good to know. So I think like asking questions too helps me to understand like what is it about this playlist, like what's the vibe, what's the feeling. But yeah, I agree. I think it's so helpful.
Yeah, the amount of times I've heard someone say, I like the sax in this song, I can't even count on one, like specifically. No.
So Petty also asks, they are totally new to composing. Are there any community resources specifically for sound designers, composers where jobs are posted? Where do you find jobs?
I don't know. No, I mean, I have tons of friends who are artists and filmmakers, and I've gone to my little network of friends in my community who, you know, because I'm from LA, I live in LA, and so there's no shortage of that in my experience. But I'm not aware of any kind of resources like that personally.
I mean, I think there's a lot of Facebook groups, and that's like a good place to start. But I would say like anything you're going to get that like drops off Facebook is probably not like super well paying, but that's okay. It's good experience. I mean, to undermine that, I guess like I have gotten a couple jobs off of like Facebook groups that have been really great. And I think like now in the COVID times, maybe that's a good place to start. At least there's so many composing groups also, which I find is a good resource for just like questions and advice. It's a great place to go for questions about gear and tech stuff, licensing, publishing, legal help. Like those are great places to start. The perspective on Facebook, Interlude, and there's a million. But just like joining a bunch of those is just like a great place to start. And then yeah, once the world is a little different, like I think trying to go meet people in person, even if that's a real challenge for you, I think is really valuable because it's so personal, the work that we're all doing together, you know?
Totally.
Yeah, if they like who you are, they're going to think that your music is cool.
Yeah.
And I was just going to double down on Aki, your answer from a couple of questions ago about going to festivals. I think that there's a misconception, especially when people are just starting out in a creative endeavor where they're like, I need to find a mentor or I need to find someone who's like way high above me to keep giving me opportunities. But for the most part, where most of your opportunities are going to start from are people at your own level, people who are also at this small little local festival or who are also just at a networking night. And if you ever see advertisements for filmmaking networking nights, composers are 100% welcome there, because what is a filmmaker? Like, I'm a filmmaker, but I am by far not the only person making my film. So everyone involved or who wants to be involved in making a film is considered that. And people will fall in love with you if you go to a filmmaker networking event and you are not yet another writer director, but you're a composer, because they're like, oh, thank God, I don't know anyone like you. And you will become a unicorn. Yeah. The same as any sound recordist. Anytime I meet someone who's like, oh yeah, I do sound and I like it, I'm like, oh, thank God, come with me. We live together now. And so definitely don't discount just going out and talking to people. And networking things are still happening on Zoom, obviously, but it's something. Anytime someone's like, hey, does somebody just want to like join the Slack community with me or just exchange digital coffee and talk about stuff, like say yes to as much of that as possible in the beginning, and you'll start to learn people who you just vibe with on a personality level. And if things work out and they have a cool new project they want music for, hey, you already have that relationship. They already like you as a person and probably think your music is cool, like Taylor just said. And it gets a lot easier to start being passed around from filmmaker to filmmaker. And before you know it, you'll have a community when there was nothing previously. You just got to start with one.
A professor I had at USC recommended scouring IMDb and getting IMDb Pro, all of which sucks, and reaching out to people 2 hours every Monday and Tuesday of every week, whatever time, right? Like 9 to 11 every Monday, every Tuesday, making that a part of your habit. And then like self-marketing aspect of being an artist and a freelancer and a composer in particular, I think feels terrible sometimes and is really hard, but it really does pay off. Like, I think especially in Los Angeles, like life is so much about perception here. It's all about like the story you tell other people about yourself, and so creative. And I don't know, like it feels like that maybe more than some of the other places I've lived. And
yeah,
I think
it's also about the story you tell yourself about who you are. Totally. And like working as you talk to people, you like learn how to craft that, you know, like the more you have to introduce yourself, like the better you get at it, and the better you get at kind of distilling who you are into a log line. And I just was going to build on the stuff you said about festivals also, that I have found when I've gone to festivals, I have not met another composer at a festival yet. I've been the only one so far.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'll go with you. Invite me next time.
Great. Let's go to Montana. It is so weird there.
That would be fun.
Yeah. That's a great festival.
Well, that's good to know. I think actually they're one of our partners. So if you're crowdfunding with us, you might get a waiver to their festival if you get enough followers. Anyways, Desire Gonzalez, asked, what's a standard rate we can expect the cost to be? I assume we is Filmmakers. Do you have a contract or invoice? What is the process of pay? And the more specific you guys can get with numbers, I think the more valuable. I think we all need to be collectively better about being transparent about rates as much as we feel comfortable, but the more transparent we all get, the more we all get paid.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned previously, I've really just done a lot of work for friends and, you know, the people in my community, and a lot of them, just like me, are just starting out, and they're, you know, very indie, small operations, and I will just ask them what their budget is, and that's been my operational system on that end. I mean, I would like to be paid on an hourly basis, maybe one day, but yeah, you know, that would be ideal because there's a lot of hours and a lot of work that goes into, you know, doing the work we do. But yeah, for me, it's been asking their budget, to be totally honest. Maybe AK can give more of a, you know, what we would like to see.
Industry standard.
Sure.
Yeah.
So top down, going from like the highest level, the way that this works in like a big studio setting is that the composer you give the entire music budget to the composer outside of whatever you're spending to license songs. And we take that money and we take a portion of it as our creative fee. And the rest goes to all the things that go into making the music for your score, including recording, hiring musicians, orchestration, all that stuff on like a very, very big level, right? So that's called a package deal. As you go further and further down, the package deals, right, get smaller and smaller and smaller. However, the breakdown of how that money is spent is the same. So if you pay us $5,000 to do your feature, that's less than micro budget, I would say. That's really small. If we're talking like Hollywood numbers. 5,000, it feels like a lot of money. And so I understand that that's a lot of money, especially if you're crowdfunding, if you're self-funding, it's a lot of money, but it goes fast. You know, we all have friends, we can ask for favors, but we can't ask for that for every project, right? So eventually you have to start paying someone. So if you want the music to be mixed by someone other than me, there's a fee involved in that, right? And that person's usually pretty expensive because they're an expert at what they do. If you want live players, That's a pretty sizable cost. There are union rates and non-union rates. The union rates are quite high. They also involve back-end royalty payments should your movie ever get sold anywhere, or should it be distributed internationally. Movies that are distributed nationally do not pay royalties to musicians for movie theater showings. Internationally, they do. So it's all stuff to consider when you're thinking about getting a score. A union gig, the players are exceptional. They're extraordinarily good players. Your music will sound like $1,000,000. Non-union gig, everybody is still ridiculously good, but you're paying less, so the quality is just a little lower. And so a way to think about this, I think, too, is time, like Taylor said. If we take $500 for your short film, the reality is that we probably end up making like $3 or $4 an hour for how much time we spend making music for you, right? So again, $500, it's a lot of money. You've worked really hard to raise $500. But on our end, it is an extraordinary amount of time that we put into your job. So I think like the answer can, unfortunately, the answer is sort of whatever you can afford. But the more money that you spend on music, the better quality your product is. If you're thinking of it solely as a product. I, as a composer, feel more appreciated. I do my job better when I'm getting paid more because I'm able to make that a priority and I'm able to put all the time in that I really want to because I'm being compensated fairly. When I'm being compensated less, I have to make your project a part of my roster with lots of other things to fill in the gaps, right? And that's just like a reality of how we all live as freelancers. We're all working on multiple things at the same time, right? But we can work on less things and do them better when we're getting paid more. Generally, I think the breakdown is like a third of whatever you're paying for music is the creative fee. But if you're paying someone $100, that's the creative fee.
Sure.
Right? If you're paying someone $500, it's also sort of likely that that's the creative fee. If you're paying someone $1,000, maybe they take half and they pay the other half in a great new instrument for their sample library and paying a friend to play guitar. If you spend $2,000, maybe they hire a friend to mix it as a favor because it's still not very much money, and they hire a guitarist, and then the rest is their creative fee. $5,000, maybe you get a couple string players and a wind player and a guitarist and someone, again, mixing it as a favor because it's not that much money, and a creative fee, right? So you can see how the breakdown expands as you go further and further and further, right? Our goal is to take a good creative fee so that we can make a living, but most composers end up spending a lot more of the fee on actually making the music because we want it to be so good. You know, we put a lot of like love and time and effort into making this be exceptional. So it's just something to think about when you're budgeting for music. I find that like early young filmmakers are often either not budgeting for music at all, right? You get to the end and they're like, well, I already spent $12,000. And like someone said that to me once and I was like, I totally get that, but you didn't spend any of that on this part of the process. And there's still work to do. So that doesn't factor in to the part that we're at now, post-production. So really like keeping post-production in mind when you make a budget is important and thinking like, what is the sound you want? If you want an orchestral sound, and you're doing a low budget movie, you're not going to get an orchestra. But if you budget $2,000 to $5,000, you can get 4 string players playing live on the whole movie, which makes the virtual orchestra just sound like $1,000,000. Everything starts to sound better. So it's something to think about. And if you're budgeting your movie and you don't know what to budget for music, call a composer. Ask that composer, what could you do for me? You know, like I haven't made my movie yet. I'm just crowdfunding. This is the kind of script. Here's the story. Like, what kind of music could we make here? What could fit here? Okay, I want a big orchestra. I can't afford it. What would really work? What do I need to raise to get the sound I want? And then if that changes, it changes. But you have somewhere to start, as opposed to budgeting $400 and then finding that you can't really afford what you want. Sorry, I just talked for a long time.
No, that is such a valuable thing. And I also think from, you know, from the producer side of it to you producers and writers out there, if you don't have the budget that AK has been talking about, then you also need to manage your own expectations on revisions. Yes. Because like if you're asking for more than one revision, that is a lot of labor time on their end, and you are already underpaying them for the amount of work that they're doing. And as creatives, we all push it more than we need to. As freelancers, we all push it more than we need to, because like we're in it for the art, you know? Nobody gets into filmmaking and composing because like that's where the big bucks are made, especially not in the beginning. We do it because we love doing it. And so of course we let ourselves get taken advantage of very frequently as a result of that. And there is absolutely a reason to work for free and to barter system it. You know, if you score their movie, they'll edit your reel for you, you know, whatever the exchange rate may be. But that needs to be a conversation. It cannot be an implicit assumption. And to the question of contracts, there absolutely needs to be a contract signed. Even if only $10 is being exchanged, there needs to be an understanding of who owns the rights to this music. What are you allowed to do with those rights? If there needs to be restrictions, how many revisions are included in this bulk rate? How, you know, there's so many things need to be worked out, and that needs to be a two-way street. That cannot just be I need my full movie scored, here's $500, bye.
Also, you as filmmakers do not need to own the publishing, especially if you don't own a publishing company. That's something composers have been asked to give up more and more and more, as music rights are really complicated, and I don't even really understand them all that well. But there's like two different rights when it comes to a piece of music. There is the writer's share and the publisher's share. And we as musicians make a little bit of money if something airs on TV or gets sold on DVD, things like that. We get a little bit of money in royalties on the back end. It's not very much, and it's less and less and less as the years go on. If you are not paying very much money for the music, we're gonna own it. If you wanna pay us $10,000 for a short film, oh yeah, you can own that music. But it's going to cost you to own the rights to the music in its entirety. However, we're happy to make agreements with you. There are non-exclusive agreements. There are agreements where you can have the music exclusively for 2 years. And then after that, if we want to try to sell it or put it somewhere else or make money off of it, we can do that, right? But when you're trying to purchase the music from us outright, you're purchasing future earning potential from us. And so that is going to cost you a lot of money. So that's something to consider too. By letting us keep our rights, you're letting this future use of the music pay for you to use the music now. So that's kind of a way to think about this. Even if you're working on a bigger budget project and you're paying somebody $15,000, if you let me keep my rights, I'm probably going to spend a little bit more money to give you like a much bigger, better end result than if you're trying to withhold all the rights to that music. I'm going to try and hang on to as much of the money as possible because I'm never going to see any back end income from it. Does that make sense?
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think something too that is more bigger picture that we can think of as well is just like, or talk about, is someone mentioned earlier, like music can be kind of an afterthought for some people whenever they're, making their movie. Or I feel like it's in part due to how, music has kind of been devalued in a sense because of how easy it is to just go to a sample library online and or something like that where you can pay not that much money and slap it on top of something, and that's your music for your film. But there's definitely a lot of red tape that goes into it whenever you're using someone like me and AK to do this for you.
You get what you pay for, same as any other part of your life where money is exchanged. And there have been a couple of follow-up questions to that, but a lot of them are like, how long does this take? Is this an okay rate? And it's like, you got to talk to people. At the end of the day, the only people who can actually answer like very concrete questions or validate like, this is what I can do for this budget, this is what's fair, is the person that you're hiring or potentially hiring. And same with, we had a question about like, should you start talking and thinking about composing at the screenplay level or just after you've shot? Again, you should talk to your composer. If you want to start thinking about music early, do it. But at the end of the day, we're just three randos, and you are not currently hiring any of us or any of our two beautiful and wonderful musicians. So they are not going to have the same answer as the people that you talk to. So just talk to people. It's going to feel weird, but we all need to get better about just a free and open exchange of, this is what I'm looking for, this is what I have. You have expertise that I don't, and now I'm going to just listen. But there's a couple other questions I want to get to. We have a question from Kenzie who asks if either of you have ever made music for animated. Have you ever done music for animation? Was the process any different, or was it pretty similar?
That sounds like so much fun. I've never done that before, but that sounds like amazing. I've never done that, no. I'm
totally afraid of animation because the emotional changes are so fast. It's something I definitely would like to branch out into because I think it has so much artistic potential and is so beautiful, and I love watching it. I had someone animate to something I wrote while I was in graduate school. They used it for a class, which was like very cool to see. But yeah, no, it's something I'm really interested in, but I think is a little scary because you're working with, in many cases, if in terms of like children's animation, you're working with like a child's attention span and like emotional, I think like an adult emotional spectrum, but a child's attention span. So the shift between feeling is so fast. And that's something I'm like still working on getting the grasp of, I think.
Interesting. All right, so we're nearing the end of our time. So the final question that I want to ask is a little bit broader. So from Esther again, thank you so much. I think Esther found out about this from Instagram. What drew you to film scoring from performing and composition? How did you begin that path? So let's end with a story.
Well, I am actually fairly new to doing this. I've been a musician and a player much longer than I've worked composing for film, but I've been doing it for about the past year and a half or so. And I love the feeling of kind of three-dimensionalizing my music. And, you know, composing and playing, you know, jazz music or playing in a band, I feel like I use the same thought process whenever I'm doing both things. I feel like the same, the process is very much the same for me, except I need to make much more commitments and, you know, whenever I'm composing. And I think that's really the only difference. But yeah, just like bringing that third dimension to the music and having things that complement each other in that way is really exciting and can be really fun and inspiring for a composer.
Cool. Your music is so cool. I love it so much. Yeah, it's so beautiful. I pawed through your Instagram before this and I was like, oh, I love it.
Thank you. I love yours. Oh my God, it's so beautiful. Yeah.
AK, what's your story?
I'm like, I think I've always had a little bit of this like duality of interests. I tend to like get interested in something and then stick with it for a very, very, very long time. So I've been a musician. I mean, I think like anybody who like ends up as a musician in a career, like you're in it somehow most of your life. But my parents worked in film on the production side. So I grew up on movie sets as like an art department kid. So I was always around movies. My parents got into movies because they're huge cinephiles. So that's like a huge part of my childhood and my life. And I love everything about movies, but I went more down the path of performer. I have a bachelor's in classical voice performance and thought I would maybe be an opera singer, and then was in bands. And I found that like my deep desire for novelty was really served by doing this job, because every gig you get is different. Every story is different. You know, like no two movies are the same, even if it's a remake. Like there's so much novelty involved. And like, I think my terrible ADD has me on this like constant quest for stuff that feels new. So, you know, like every job has a new tech issue, a new instrument, a new way to think about how to solve a problem. It uses so much of your brain. And for performing, I felt it's very repetitive. For me, coming from the classical world, I would say this is probably really different for you coming from jazz. But like for the other classical side, like repetition is the goal. You are an interpreter. It's not really about you as a performer. You're really an interpreter, interpreting in like the most authentic way you can to the music. And like, I needed a little bit more. And so films where it wasn't able to, like, a way for me to marry these two things in two parts of myself.
I love that. Both of those answers are really, really fun. And thank you for taking us out on a story. So other than the Instagrams that are currently scrolling across the screen, where can folks find more about you and listen to your music?
Oh, you're muted.
Taylor, you're muted.
Sorry. I have a website called TaylorBlakeMusic.com. It's actually pretty new, and it's kind of cute. So if you want to check that out.
I have a website too. It's way less easy to spell. I'm sorry. It's AlexandraKalinowski.com, but it's on my Instagram. You can find it. And I have a lot of like my songwriting and a lot of music and stuff I've written up there.
She has a great website. Yeah, she has a really good website.
Both links are in the comments, and soon they will also be in the video description. So definitely follow these two awesome creators. And thanks so much for being here, guys. This was really lovely.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was awesome.
All right. Well, as we say goodbye to our wonderful composers, I am going to tell you guys about our upcoming other cool things that you can engage with us on, because like we said, this is a weekly thing that we do. Lunch and Learn is our weekly Wednesday series, but it's far from the only thing we're up to. So if you are interested in craft and the conversations around craft that we've been having, and music was cool, but now you're looking for another craft thing to explore. This Friday at 1 p.m. Pacific time, we have an actors roundtable of 4 awesome actors coming together to talk about the realities of being an actor in 2020 and what their hopes are for the future. The actors on that panel include Nana Mensah from 13 Reasons Why, Jake Choi from Single Parents, Janina Gavankar from True Blood, and Raul Castillo from Atypical, in addition to, a number of other things for all of them. So that is going to be on Friday at 1 p.m. Actors Roundtable. So if you're curious to hear about the craft of acting as much as you were curious to hear about the craft of composing, we encourage you to stop by. Also, if you love our Lunch and Learn sessions in particular, next Wednesday, our Lunch and Learn on August 19th, 1 p.m. Pacific time, we have the art of zine making as our topic, where our events manager, Shayna Reyes Woolley, and artist and zine maker Meg Adler will discuss the role of zines. That's Z-I-N-E-S. I sound like a total boomer when I say it out loud, which is why I will not be involved. But they're going to be discussing the role of zines in your quarantine creativity and how zines are an effective tool for storytelling and bringing light to marginalized voices. So if you're curious to hear about that, definitely stop by then. Apparently it's zines. Yeah, see, I told you, real boomer pronunciation here. I'm so sorry. Also, if you enjoy me pronouncing words like a boomer, or enjoyed the incredible conversation that we had today here, if you're able, we would love to continue bringing these awesome events to you for free. And the best way to ensure that we keep doing that is to check out the link in our video description and in the comments to contribute what you can to help us keep bringing all this awesome stuff to you. There's a pay what you can link if you are able. Even $1, $2 goes a hugely long way in making this a longer form thing and letting us continue doing this and bringing these conversations to you and talking to neat and interesting people. So thank you again for joining me for your lunch hour or afternoon snack hour if you're on the East Coast like me, and we'll see you soon.